we are in a new year, and that means more episodes. And of course, your favorite, we are going on a deep dive. This week, we are going to be talking about the 1986 comedy Armed and Dangerous with Eugene Levy and John Candy. As always, I am your host, Jeff Galashaw, and my co-host, as always, is Andre Joseph.
Circles go round and around. And of course, I might as well introduce a guy that nobody knows about.
Right, I'm just sitting here. You want me to introduce myself? Because what I'm thinking is I'm the only guy that actually saw this in the movie theater when it came out.
Yeah.
No shit.
So introduce me.
Yes, Mr. Mark W. Chapetta. He's a close friend of mine. His son Max appeared in my movie Dismissal Time recently, and that's making the festival rounds now. And if you have a school, we're happy to show it. Contact me directly. Mark here is a professional private investigator known for his tireless work and ethics and relentless efforts. He's licensed in Massachusetts, although he performs his services throughout the United States and international. He's no stranger to the media, appearing in countless magazines and media outlets, including the Boston Herald, Boston Globe, Boston Magazine, The Village Voice, and the Boston Phoenix. He's written a satire book on cheating. He's appeared on Howard Stern's show, and also WCVB's Chronicle, A&E, Fox Nation, and many other news outlets. So, Mark, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. That sounds pretty impressive.
That is a lot of stuff I didn't know about.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, the life of a private eye. Over the years, I've kind of gone from covert to overt. So I no longer do undercover work because of making somewhat of a media presence. And, I have to, because I got busted once. I had gone on the Stern show and, other than the radio, they had hired TV. And I got hired to go out and try to recover some stolen skin electrolysis equipment. So I did kind of like a deep undercover dive, had a fake name, made up an appointment that I wanted all the hair removed from my legs because I was into fitness. When I took my clothes, put the robe on because the nurse left the office. I'm crawling behind a machine, getting serial numbers. She comes in, the meeting, the consult goes great. I leave, I make an appointment under my alias. I get a phone call 20 minutes later saying, I know who the F you are. I saw you on the Howard Stern show, and you can tell your client to go kiss my rear end. So ever since then, no more undercover.
Wow. And I also read you were once an aspiring actor. You lived in Los Angeles for a time.
Yeah, I was back in the early 1990s. I was a prison guard here in Massachusetts working with the sexual deviant. And a buddy of mine invited me to go do a modeling pageant. And I'm like, look, I'm 5'7", barely. You want me to do the catwalk here in a hotel in Rhode Island, Massachusetts? I did. And I met actually a pretty famous casting director, this guy, Gary Schaefer. You can look him up on IMDb. Casted for Chips, Dynasty, Medical Center. He was the one of the top casting directors in Hollywood back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then he invited me out to something called The Program. So myself, 12 other so-called actor models lived in a mansion out in Hollywood for 3 months, and we trained acting. Now I told my parents, my dad, I'm living at home at the time with my little Italian father, and I'm like, Dad, I'm quitting the prison. I'm going out to Hollywood to be an actor. He almost killed me. But this was pre anyone knowing to put cameras inside homes, for reality purposes. So no one even knew what was going on. So yeah, 3 months, trained, slept, ate, acting. John Travolta's sister was my acting coach.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I became a private actor when I was out there.
Interesting. Wow.
Here's my dog in the background. I think Amazon's delivering something.
No worries. So yeah, Mark, thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
So I figured because you are an 80s fan and you've grown up
Oh,
on some of these movies, I wanted to talk about this one in particular because it's kind of an oddball for the era and for the film star John Candy, rest in peace. So yes, Armed and Dangerous came out in 1986, directed by Mark L. Lester, who was best known for such films as Class of 1984, Stephen King's Firestarter with Drew Barrymore, and he had just come off a little big indie film called Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So this was like kind of a departure, but not quite. We'll get more into that later. So this movie, believe it or not, had been around for a few years in its development process. It was originally going to be a John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd vehicle right after they did the movie Neighbors. But of course, John Belushi passed away, sadly. And then the plans changed to have John Candy team up with Dan Aykroyd. And of all filmmakers at the time, they were looking at John Carpenter to direct this movie because he had just done Starman, and they thought the horror guy could do anything. So let's give him this little action comedy. But supposedly, he had a conflict with Dan Aykroyd because of the car chase at the end of the film. I think Aykroyd had some different ideas that were a little too off base, and basically John Carpenter backed out of the film due to those creative differences. And then eventually Dan Aykroyd stepped out. And I read somewhere Eddie Murphy was considered at one point to play the Dan Aykroyd part, but that didn't happen because Beverly Hills Cop hit. Then Brian Grazer, hot off of producing Splash, decided he wanted to take on the film, which Hal Ramis had wrote and was set to produce. And he was going to team up Candy and Tom Hanks again because they had such great chemistry in Splash. Somehow Tom Hanks dropped out. No reason that we know why, but in my conspiracy theory, I think they had done the movie Volunteers. That didn't do well. So probably their agents were like, let's keep these guys away from each other for a while. So now they have no guy to play the lawyer Norman Kane. And so John Candy suggested his SCTV friend Eugene Levy to play the part. And he had also been in Splash and was starting to make his way around the business. So they got put together, and that's how you got this movie. So in a nutshell, you have John Candy, this jolly, loving, comedian, playing an LAPD cop who gets suspended from the force after he busts two of his fellow LAPD cops stealing TVs, thinking that they're perps. And at the same time, you have Eugene Levy playing this public defender who can't defend this neo-Nazi that's threatening to kill him. So the judge says, well, I'll give him this sentence, but you have to quit law because you suck. So somehow these two guys end up working for the same guard dog security organization and become partners. But the thing is, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say for $4.60 an hour.
Yes.
That just kind of blew my mind. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this was 1986 numbers. And the whole thing about it too is that they get paid that little, but they have to pay these large expenses in union dues. So they're already like, well, where's this money going? And then one night they're guarding this warehouse. The warehouse gets raided by two burglars who, believe it or not, no surprise, they're the two guys that work for the union, just in ski masks, but you can tell by their voices it's them.
In their eyes.
Yes. And
I'll explain when you're done why, what I picked up on.
Yeah, definitely. So now they get in trouble. They get transferred to working in this toxic waste dump. They see these two other guys who've been there for a while. They were in the same circumstance where they guard that same warehouse, and the same thing happened to them. So like, okay, something's going on. So now these two guys have to investigate their own union to discover this corruption, being led by the union leader played by the great Robert Loggia. So, Mark, since you're our special guest, tell us about your earliest memories about this film.
I mean, John Candy is one of my all-time favorites. I think I told you that every Thanksgiving Eve, I make all my children put their cell phones away, and watch Plane, Trains, and Automobiles. So that movie is near and dear to my heart, my family, and as much as my kids were reluctant to watch it, now I tested them like 2 years ago and said we were going to watch something different, and they were like, "Oh, come on, Dad, we want to watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles." So it worked. So we're all fans of John Candy and his quotes, but I believe I actually probably went and saw this in the movie theater because 1986, I was a senior in high school here in Massachusetts. And growing up back in that era, there really wasn't much to do other than go to the movies on the weekends, with your friends or your girlfriend. So, and John Candy, Eugene Levy, just classic actors. I always get a kick, and I went back and did some research because I always feel like they really give John Candy great names in every movie he's ever that he's ever been in. Like Frank Dooley, come on, like that fits the personality of he's kind of the blubbering security guard, but kind of like in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, there's always a moment in every film where he punches someone out. He's like this big, strong, tough guy. One of the things that I enjoy later in life is when you go back and watch these films is that you pick up on other characters that you now recognize from today's television and film. And the one behind the mask was, you know who that is, right?
Jonathan Banks.
Jonathan Banks. I'm like, holy crap, that's Mike from Breaking Bad.
Yeah, and he was just coming off of Beverly Hills Cop, and Brian James playing his partner had done 48 Hours. So it's like, let's get all the Eddie Murphy actors in this movie for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, great film, basic plot. Man gets the girl at the end of the film. They foil the criminal conspiracy, the two of them, while they're tripping over each other, and I don't know. I enjoyed watching it again. I think one of the only complaints I had is it was so damn short. It was only like an hour and 25 minutes.
It goes by pretty quick, yeah.
Yeah, and I read somewhere else that Eugene Levy pulled his name on some of the credits. Did you see that?
I didn't hear that, but I know Harold Ramis was not happy with the film, and
was it Harold Ramis? It might have been Harold. Yeah, Harold Ramis. Excuse me. So Harold Ramis was the executive producer and asked to leave his name off as producer.
Yeah, he stayed on as the writer, but it was like Caddyshack 2. He wanted nothing to do with that.
Right. Which so I would have been interesting to see what the other script was.
Yeah. Jeff, what were your earliest memories of this film?
I remember it being played on Channel 11, WPIX a lot, and HBO a lot. So I saw it like from a young age. I enjoy the film. I mean, I thought that, John Candy and Drag looked like Divine, actually, and it was kind of scary watching it as a child. I think this was also kind of a little departure for John Candy because, again, he usually does comedic characters, but here he feels a lot more aggressive because usually he's more the silent in the background type who all of a sudden becomes tough towards the end. And here he's the aggressive one and kind of encouraging Eugene Levy to grow balls and, be tough. He steals the film, but who truly steals the whole film with his 5 minutes of screen time is Steve Railsback.
Yeah, the cowboy.
Exactly. I was like, that is the movie for me that put him on the map where I first started noticing him. And, I guess when you look back at it, as Mark was saying, you look at the cast and it's like, this is stacked by today's standard. You got Tony Tiny Lister. You got Larry Hankin. You surprisingly have a young Meg Ryan who falls for Eugene Levy.
I'm going to talk about that.
That was more unrealistic.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of this movie. I have nothing against it, but I don't know, for some odd reason when you described it as an action comedy, I'm like, I remember the comedy. The action, all I remember is the car chase as far as real action throughout the film. But like I said, I really enjoyed it. I will admit, even again, I was 8 years old when this came out, so I would not have naturally thought of Eugene Levy for that role. But as always, he's pretty solid in the role. And like I said, I just really enjoyed this film. And
the reason I come back to this, and like you, Jeff, I'd seen it on Channel 11, I'd seen it on HBO a few times. And I think one thing that definitely stood out was the cast, because seeing John Candy in the same movie with Meg Ryan and all these people was kind of odd. So that was like, Meg Ryan, I knew from When Harry Met Sally and all these other romantic films that she was doing with Tom Hanks. I'm like, what you doing in a movie with John Candy? And then you see it, and it's like, oh, well, this was before they all started to really blow up.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Also, two of my favorite character actors, James Tolkien and David Wohl, playing bit roles here, but still always memorable.
Well, even more memorable than that, if you're a young adolescent boy when I was growing up, were the Lander sisters.
Oh, yes, 80 staples.
They were everything back then, and they were every boy's dream back then, at least for me, but I even Googled them to see where they are now. And they're, I think they're doing like Comic-Cons and stuff, and they still look great.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Hey, this is definitely better than Stewardess School or that TV movie they did together.
But I tell you something, there's a lot of reasons this movie stands out. So one thing I got to say right off the bat, the soundtrack is fire. I mean, of all groups you could get at that time, you get Atlantic Starr to do your theme song. I mean, this is like after Ray Parker drew at Ghostbusters, so now everybody wanted to do a theme song at that time. And I think, honestly, it's the best thing that came out of this film, because I still listen to it now. And having Maurice White of Earth, Wind, and Fire producing this, it's just like what we were talking about the other day with George Duke producing the Heavenly Kids soundtrack. Like, how did that happen? I wish he was alive so we could talk to him about that. What made you attracted to that movie? But yeah, he produced most of the soundtrack. He even provided one of the songs in the film. And there's just so many things about it that's just so out of the box. I mean, again, Mark L. Lester was an action director primarily in sci-fi. So having him do a movie with John Candy as your lead, and he's like shooting up people and blowing shit up, is pretty remarkable for that time, while still doing like their SCTV type setups and characters, in those moments, like when they're in the porn shop, and you talked about like him in the drag, but also when they're like in the quarter part, with the girl putting in the quarter and she's stripping for like seconds. Like, I gotta think.
That's right. Yeah, it keeps. I hate to admit, I think I've actually been in one of those before. I always love when they find two guys that they're gonna pull in, knock out, take their clothes and put on how it fits them perfectly.
Oh yeah, another 80 staple cliche.
Yep.
Right. And do you think like that scene would fly in today's day of filmmaking? In the sex shop.
These days, I don't know.
No.
But the drag part, I don't think you could do now.
No?
No. Though the ass cheek scene might be able to pass. Maybe on Netflix.
Yeah, if it's like Jason Segel or somebody like that.
I enjoyed the beginning of it because, in the Norman Kane character, because I'm a criminal defense investigator. So I deal with public defenders and kind of shady attorneys every day of my life. And, and he played the role so well, in the beginning when he was in the courtroom and, getting intimidated, although I've never seen that happen with one of my clients, but I always love courtroom scenes just based on what I do for a living and dealing with, the used car salesman type attorneys in my line.
Yeah, everything in this movie is dialed up. This is not like, as much as I love Running Scared was a little bit more realistic in its approach. This film is definitely like everybody's a caricature, down to the neo-Nazi in the courtroom, the other security guards like Larry Hankin, and yes, Zeus, who, by the way, I should mention for wrestling fans, this was his first film. This was before No Holds Barred and him going to WWE and wrestling Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, he really wasn't like, I don't think he was ever really a wealthy guy, but being that this was his first movie, you hear stories about John Candy off camera being like this super nice guy and being so giving to people. So Zeus, before he had passed away a few years ago, he did an interview. He talked about working on the film and mentioned how John Candy actually got him a house during the time that they were working on the movie. So he was very generous with him. It's not like you see on screen where like he's this really angry guy. Like, no, he was actually really super nice. And Candy, reciprocated that.
And he had a handful of lines in the film as well. You know, they were throwaway lines or, you know, one or two lines, but
More lines and no holds barred.
True. And he got to be menacing in that gym scene after he gets free from being strangled.
Sad to see him go. He was just,
Man,
you know,
that was a surprise.
such a great character. And, you know, for those of us that are wrestling fans, that, you know, that whole angle, you know, with Hulk Hogan was just, you know, magic back there.
I believed it as a kid, you know, like, oh my God, the guy from the movie's going to come and wrestle him. Oh my God.
Right. We all believed it as a kid, which was the beauty of that sport. But I know we're not talking wrestling, but
there'll be deep dives on that stuff too one day.
Oh, you better bring me in. I'm supposed to be having lunch soon with Hacksaw Jim Dugan. So
nice.
Yeah,
I'm glad he's doing better. I know he had some health issues for a while.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's actually doing great. Yeah, I mean, it's a classic 80s film. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Stripes along those lines.
Yeah.
Or what's the other one? With Aykroyd, God.
Spies Like Us?
Spies Like Us. Kind of remind me a little bit of Spies Like Us. Another classic film. I said you can't go wrong. What did he come off of, John Candy? I was trying to look to see what he had done prior to this film.
Well, he had obviously Splash was the one that kind of like raised his profile, but after that, you know, he had Summer Rental for Carl Reiner, and he was in Volunteers, which I mentioned. He was also Richard Pryor's baseball buddy in Brewster's Millions.
First movie ever.
Now that being said, you know, this kind of goes back to Candy, because at that time his profile was going up, but studios really didn't know how to use him. They didn't know if they wanted to make him the next Belushi or, you know, just some other, you know, big funny guy, and none of that was him. And I think in this case, like you were saying, Mark, they were trying to make him overly aggressive. In fact, there was supposed to be a scene in the film between him and Meg Ryan where he called her a bitch. He wouldn't do it. And so he got into this whole shouting argument with the director, and the director quit for one day. And Brian Grazer, for the only time in his career, had to direct an entire day of shooting. And then eventually the director came back. But it really wasn't until John Hughes came along with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles that he knew how to find that balance between making Candy that lovable blue-collar guy, but also having that kind of undercurrent of sadness to his characters that made you really love him even more. And I honestly believe, like, even if you see him in like later movies like JFK, when the one time he had a dramatic turn, I really think if he was alive today, he would have won an Oscar at this point. I think he could have had a Tom Hanks level career at least.
Oh, 100%. I mean, he is. I even hate watching his movies because I get sad. Sad when I watch, you know, movies with him. It just, you know, even when I watch Home Alone. And he's got the little cameo in it, or, you know, Cool Runnings or Spaceballs, or, you know, just anything. You know, it makes me sad that he passed away so early, and you hear nothing but great things about him, you know, as a person, as a father. He's been gone since the early 90s, right? Yeah,
94 was when he passed away. One making Wagons West or Wagons East with Richard Lewis.
28 years ago. He's been gone 28, 29 years. Just think of how many more movies he would have done, and he'd still only be, you know, a fairly young man, you know, his late 60s, early 70s. I guess. And he probably would have won, you know, a dramatic role, because he could play, you know, that dramatic part. And like I said, Tom Hanks started out with what was it, Bosom Buddies, and you know, and look how his career took off.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story that kind of made me smile the other day. So I don't know how I came across this, but somebody on Instagram posted a quick clip. It was from NBC's Saturday morning lineup from 1989. This was the season when Saved by the Bell hit the air. And the clip was like, it was of the kids on the show meeting Sherman Hemsley from from the Jeffersons, because he was doing Amen at that time. And Sherman Hemsley was like introducing all the shows that were coming on Saturday morning that year. And there was one point you saw the Saved by the Bell characters get transported to Camp Candy, the Camp Candy cartoon that John Candy used to do and that he produced. So John Candy actually interacts with the cast of Saved by the Bell. So there was like universe building going on in 1989.
Wow, that's
I was so shocked at that. It's like the Lost Saved by the Bell episode.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's I watched it last week when you asked me to come on just to refresh myself, because you get to my age, you start forgetting these things. And it doesn't run that often. It's not one of those movies that that if you're just clicking through on a rainy Saturday that'll pop up, unfortunately.
It was not a hit at the time. Remember, 86 was Top Gun, Aliens, Karate Kid Part 2, Crocodile Dundee. And this was one of those movies that just kind of got lost in the shuffle. And also, too, they really promoted the whole movie around Candy more so than Eugene Levy. Eugene Levy really didn't blow up till American Pie came along.
Because even on the poster, John Candy is front and center.
Yeah.
Right.
Leather, gun gear. And
trying to make him look like he's a parody of Schwarzenegger, which is funny to look at, but it's really not enough of a selling point for the picture.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking at it right now. It is right. You should have like Eugene Levy in the background. You get the two burglars in the fire.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, and Eugene Levy's in this movie.
How about the scene with the Doberman Pinchers?
Oh yeah, when they robbed the warehouse.
When they robbed the warehouse, and John Candy just kicks the crap out of one of them.
Yeah, that's totally unexpected too.
Yeah, right.
I love the part when he's trying to get to the car chase and he's running across the bridge, and you have like the beach going kids laughing at him, and then he takes the knife and he shoves it into the tire. Yeah. I always get a kick out of that because I can't stand those kids.
Right. Well, they were kind of picking on him because he was kind of a big, heavy set guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll show you."
And nobody really mentions like James Keach also helped write this.
He had a cameo in this movie, right? Well, his father was it?
Well, no, his father plays a role.
Yeah, he's the judge.
Exactly, and this is like James Keach around. What was the driving school movie he co-starred in? With like Bill Murray's younger brother.
Was that a TV movie?
No, this one actually made it to theaters. It was played on television a lot, but it had like Jennifer Tilly in one of her first roles. Sally Kellerman as an S&M judge. I can't remember.
It was a Speed Zone, right? Because that had John Candy.
No, that was a John Candy movie, or he had a role in that one.
Yeah.
This was like
Walk the Line. That was 2005. Long Riders, 1980. He's got 120 credits.
Is it like Night School or something like that? Moving Violations.
It might be Moving Violations.
And I remember
because it was like a Police Academy type knockoff, right?
Exactly. And
I think it was Moving Violations.
Okay, because I'm like, I can't remember.
I could be wrong because I've never seen it all the way through.
Oh, see, I watch it all the time on television. That's why I'm even ashamed. I can't remember. It's like one of those movies you just always remember. But yeah, so James Keach, who became ultra Christian in the 90s, was like producing his wife's show, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and directing episodes of it. So it's like nice.
Impressive, man. You guys are a wealth of movie information here. Like,
like
you guys are awesome. This is Jeepers Creepers. It's nice to see that younger guys that are in their 40s or hitting their 40s are keeping the 80s. Why do you think it is that these 80s movies are in today's day are I wouldn't even say making a comeback. I think they've always been important in everyone's life of cinema, but is it because all the movie executives now are my age in their mid to late 50s, and this is when we grew up, or You guys didn't grow up with 80s. You were younger during the 80s. So, like, I mean,
I was
why
an
is
infant.
it still so popular?
I think it's also because it was like kind of the last hurrah when you could still kind of push buttons and not, be, pigeonholed or yelled at for, the behavior that went on the screen. So it's like almost the last of the wild, wild west to a certain extent. But again, like you said, also like filmmakers that are coming out now grew up on all these films. So, they like constantly reference them. Some like talk about how it sucked in the 80s because, they like movies from the 70s more that they're older, but they grew up with this generation's movie. So maybe that's where they got their comedic sense. But it's sort of like how when we were interviewing somebody for a future episode that people will eventually see. But that was also when you could get like these screen legends from the 50s and they were still working and willing to be in your movies. And now it's like you would be like, if he was alive, like you wouldn't see a Paul Newman and like a straight to Netflix comedy. So it's like kind of also the last time you really saw that where, like marquee names were still willing to get down and dirty with, the decade without thinking, oh, I'm definitely above this. Is the equivalent, I guess, now seeing like Anthony Hopkins in a Thor movie. It's like, huh?
Well, I mean, I recently saw someone post something online. There was a nice big long disclaimer at the beginning of 16 Candles.
Yes.
With all the, all
outdated attitudes.
Yeah, yes. So at least they're rolling that in the beginning and giving people a chance if they may have forgotten what the film is like or what type of language or certain references are made so they can turn it off instead of just like re-editing all the movies.
They're not re-editing.
Well, like you said, too, I think it's also executives and even creatives that grew up in our era that are starting to bring these things back. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, you look at this last season of Stranger Things, putting that Kate Bush song on, and that song wasn't a hit at the time, but you play that on that show. Now you got kids literally in middle school that are like discovering this and their teachers are telling them all about it. And then they go and they find this stuff. And even with like some of these Marvel films where the filmmakers are taking things from those movies, like say Captain America: The Winter Soldier has a War Games reference. Right. And like, oh, what's that? And then they end up finding it and they see the correlation between the two. And that kind of brings those old movies back to the forefront. And then you end up getting like these remakes and reboots and continuations that are either good or bad,
Right. Yeah, there's no middle. I think if I remember correctly, going back in the memory bank, I think what may have drawn me to the film, and I think the commercial promoting Armed and Dangerous back in 1985, 86 was the cat scene. I think that's how they promoted the trailer, back when it first hit the theaters. So, I mean, it's a great way to open the film. It's just... there's something about him. There's something about John Candy that when you ask me to come on, like, I don't have a deep dive into this film like you guys do, but, or films in general, but anything that has to do with John Candy, it just warms my heart, and it's innocent, simple humor, and I went back and watched it a couple of weeks ago. It was just fun, and and I chuckled and I laughed and I remembered the scenes. I'm like, oh my God, that's what I remember from this movie. I remember the scene in the in the sex shop. I remember the chaps, and then I got to learn new stuff because of actors that I didn't know who they were back then. And then fast forward 35, 36 years later, I know them from some of my favorite shows, of today's day. I mean, I don't know if you guys do this, but it annoys my wife. Like, we'll watch TV, and as we're watching TV, I'll be on my phone, like searching Wikipedia and just like checking bios out on, on when I'm watching.
I do that
because I just get curious throughout the course of a film. So I was doing it with this movie as I was watching it again. I'm like, oh, what have they done since? Oh, are they still alive? Oh, this is, so. It annoys my wife, but So be it.
So we wrap this up. Mark, would you recommend this to people?
Oh, 100%. You know, anything with John Candy, you know, and Eugene Levy or Frank Dooley and what is it, Norman Kane?
Yeah, no, we can.
Two characters, anything with a good, you know, mafia. It was kind of a fun, generic mafia spin too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it didn't make my, you know, my heritage look too bad, you know, as an Italian American. but I also was able to relate to it because of being in law enforcement for the last 35 years. So 100%. And it's one of those films I think you could sit down with your teenage son or daughter and watch it and kind of like reminisce. And it's just good, pure, innocent fun, you know, in my opinion.
What about you, Jeff?
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, I watched it as a kid. It wasn't like, oh no, we're talking about Armed and Dangerous. No. So yeah, I agree with Mark about like it's just something that's pure fun. There's like nothing too tawdry about it. It's just entertainment. You know, you're not sitting here. Well, I think this was really meant to represent this. It's just no. It's a stupid comedy that you can enjoy and enjoy the actors in it. And, you know, again, one of the few times you'll see Eugene Levy in kind of a lead role. And
yeah, but I don't believe the romance with him and Meg Ryan.
I agree. Yeah, gets hot chick at the end. You knew that was coming. Man gets hot chick at the end of the film, you know? Mm-hmm. You know, but would you rather have seen her walk off with John Candy? What would have been more realistic?
If you had Tom Hanks in the part, then they would have had like 3 or 4 movies together.
yeah.
You could have walked off with Steve Railsback. Hey, why not?
That could have been a funny twist.
That would have been that. Would
real hero of the film.
Yeah, if he kind of rolled up on it and the final scene there. That's great movie. I'll probably watch it again 30 years from now when I'm when I'm 84.
Yeah, I would definitely say, you know, it's not to the level of like the John Hughes movies that he did or something like Cool Runnings, but it's definitely better than Once Upon a Crime or, you know, Canadian Bacon, some of the later stuff that it's kind of sad to, Speed Zone, like those movies, you know. This is much more entertaining than that.
What was the budget for that film back then?
I think it was like probably it wasn't much. I think it was like between 12 and 14 million, maybe. I mean, it had to be a bit because of the stunts at the end.
Yeah, the stunts at the end is what put it over the top. But other than that,
it's pretty grounded.
And the mansion,
which was the Beverly Hillbillies mansion.
Yeah, who hasn't been stuck in a sauna?
Yeah.
just a fun film and fun reminiscing about it. And you know, I hope you can have me on talking about something else. If you ever do Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I probably know every line from that. You know, I mean that movie is just, you know, just gets me every time, because I remember going to see it in the theater with all my high school buddies when I think it came out on Christmas Day in 1987.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when it came out. So my buddy was going to BC College at the time, and we all drove up there to just hang out with him for the weekend and after Christmas festivities. And we all drove up there, and I think it was Christmas night. I don't know. I remember seeing it with my buddies. You know, but just cool.
Anything you want to plug before you go?
Me? You can just go to my website, markschiapetta.online, and you can see my name there, how to spell it. And no, man, I'm just I'm just a private dick, gumshoe, trying to make a living. Just keeping an eye on my phone because I'm on trial right now for a murder case, a state murder case, and a federal drug case. So I'm kind of got the clothes in the other room in case I got to jump into the phone booth and run into court and testify. But all morning I was actually staking out a key witness on our murder trials case to see if She fled the area because I need to drag her in the court probably next week as
Oh, wow.
a witness. So yeah, I have a fun job and enjoying helping out my youngest son Max, who who had the opportunity to play an extra in dismissal time. I even had the opportunity to play what was I, a principal or something?
Yeah, you were like a principal, well, a dean, just a teacher in the lunchroom.
Yeah, I brought my kid there, and I got asked to break up a fight. I'm like, that's not acting. So it was an honor, but it's an honor to work with you going forward on your projects with my youngest son, who has a passion to be an actor.
Absolutely, and it was an honor to have you on today, and definitely have you back on very soon.
Yeah, I'd love to come on.
Yeah, thank you for making time to be here.
Yeah, Jeff, nice meeting you, man. I love your knowledge, and as a private eye, I'm going to do a deep dive into you now and see what you're all about.
Hey, go for it. I don't have any too much time. So go for it.
All right, and with that, we bid you guys adieu.
See you next episode.